It's one of those things that sounds like the start of a joke, but it's actually just history. Jews and Muslims are family. Not like cousins you only see at weird weddings, but more like brothers who started with the same dad. That dad was Abraham, or Ibrahim as he is known in Islam. Both faiths look back to him as a foundational figure, a patriarch who established a covenant with God. This shared ancestry is not just a footnote in a dusty old book. It's a deep spiritual connection that has woven these two communities together for centuries. They share prophets, stories, and even moral codes, creating a tapestry of common heritage that is often forgotten in the noise of modern headlines. For a very long time, this shared history meant shared lives. In places like medieval Spain, North Africa, and the Middle East, Jewish and Muslim communities lived side by side. They were neighbors, business partners, and sometimes even friends. They influenced each other's philosophy, science, music, and food. Think of it like a cultural potluck where everyone brought their best dish, and the result was a feast richer than anything they could have made alone. This period, often called the Golden Age, wasn't perfect, but it showed that coexistence wasn't just possible. It was productive and beautiful. It was a time when religious identity didn't automatically mean you were on opposing teams. This connection runs deeper than just historical events. It's embedded in daily religious practice. Many of the core beliefs are strikingly similar. Both Judaism and Islam are strictly monotheistic, believing in one all-powerful, indivisible God. Both have dietary laws, kosher for Jews and halal for Muslims, that govern what they eat. Both have traditions of daily prayer, charity, and fasting. These aren't small overlaps. They are the very pillars of faith. It's like two people discovering they have the same favorite movie, the same favorite song, and the same weird habit of dipping their fries in their milkshake. The foundation for understanding is already there. So, if they started from such a similar place, what happened? Why does the world today often see these two groups as permanent adversaries? The story of their separation is not an ancient religious war that has been raging for thousands of years. Instead, it's a much more recent story. It's a story about land, about nations, and about politics. The shift from neighbors to rivals was fueled by the events of the 20th and 21st centuries, which drew new lines on maps and, in the process, drew new lines between people. Understanding this history is key to understanding that the conflict we see today is not inevitable. It was built, and anything that is built can be taken apart. The journey from family to strangers didn't happen overnight. It was a slow drift that turned into a powerful current, driven by the winds of modern politics. The most significant event that changed everything was the creation of the State of Israel in 1948. For Jewish people, after the horrors of the Holocaust, it was the fulfillment of a long-held dream, a safe homeland. But for Palestinians living on that land, it was the Nakba, or the catastrophe, which led to their displacement and the loss of their homes. This single moment created two completely different stories about the same piece of land. It became the central point of a political conflict that would come to define Jewish-Muslim relations for generations. This was not a religious dispute at its core. It was a clash over territory, sovereignty, and national identity. But because Israel was defined as a Jewish state and its neighbors were predominantly Muslim nations, the political conflict quickly took on a religious dimension. Politicians and media on all sides began to frame the struggle in religious terms. It became Jews versus Muslims instead of a conflict between national groups with competing claims. This framing was powerful. It turned a complex political problem into a simple, emotional story of us against them, making compromise much harder to achieve. The lines were no longer just on a map. They were drawn in people's minds. The tension grew worse with each passing decade. Wars in 1967 and 1973 solidified the battle lines. The Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza created a reality of daily friction, checkpoints, and settlements. For Palestinians, life became a struggle for basic rights and freedom. For Israelis, it became a constant state of alert, fearing attacks and violence. Each act of violence, whether from state military action or from militant groups, added another layer of anger, grief, and mistrust. The political conflict became a cycle of pain, where each side felt they were the primary victim, and each side's suffering made it harder to see the humanity of the other. Recent events have poured gasoline on this long smoldering fire. the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, and the devastating war in Gaza that followed have pushed tensions to a breaking point. The violence has not stayed in the Middle East. It has spilled over, affecting communities around the world. In places like the United States and Europe, the conflict has become a bitter social debate. It has strained friendships and created deep divisions within communities that once lived together peacefully. The political conflict in a faraway land has managed to build walls between neighbors everywhere, proving that political storms can have a global reach. For many Jewish people around the world, the events of October 7, 2023 felt like a deep collective trauma. It wasn't just a news story. It was an attack that resurrected historical fears of persecution and violence that are etched into the Jewish identity. The killing of 1,200 people and the taking of hostages by Hamas brought back the nightmare that a safe place for Jews could be violated at any moment. This has led to a profound sense of grief and a constant state of worry for the hostages still held captive. In synagogues and community centers from Fort Worth to Frankfurt, prayers for safety and the return of the hostages have become a central part of life, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. This fear has been made worse by a sharp rise in anti-Semitism globally. Since the conflict escalated, many Jewish people report feeling targeted and misunderstood. Jewish students on college campuses have faced hostility, and synagogues have increased their security. Some people have even lost friends over differing views on the conflict, finding that lifelong relationships have fractured under the weight of political disagreement. There is a feeling that they are being asked to answer for the actions of the Israeli government, a government many of them may not even support. This creates a painful sense of isolation, where their identity is tied to a conflict they cannot control. At the same time, there is a strong sense of institutional support in some places. In the United States, for example, local and national governments have issued proclamations supporting Israel and condemning the Hamas attack. This support can feel reassuring, a sign that they are not alone. However, it can also complicate the situation, as it sometimes deepens the divide with their Muslim neighbors who feel their own suffering is being ignored. The Jewish community finds itself in a difficult position, grateful for the support but worried that it contributes to the polarization that is tearing communities apart. It's a delicate balance between seeking security and seeking peace with others. Despite the fear and the pain, there is also a powerful desire within many Jewish communities to build bridges. Many Jewish leaders and individuals are actively reaching out to their Muslim counterparts. They refuse to let a political conflict define their relationships with their neighbors. They focus on shared values of peace, compassion, and humanity. In interfaith groups and dialogues, they are working hard to find common ground and to remind each other that they are more than just headlines. This work is not easy, and it is often filled with difficult conversations. But it comes from a deep belief that the only way forward is together. For Muslim communities, especially those with Palestinian roots, the recent war in Gaza has brought overwhelming pain and a sense of profound loss. They watch the news and see images of destroyed homes, displaced families, and a staggering number of casualties. Over 41,000 reported by September 2024. This isn't just a distant tragedy. For many, it's personal. They have family and friends in Gaza, and they hear first-hand stories of suffering and survival. This creates a constant state of trauma and grief. The feeling is one of helplessness, watching a humanitarian crisis unfold while the world seems unable or unwilling to stop it. This pain is often mixed with a deep sense of frustration. Many Muslims in Western countries feel that their suffering is invisible. While governments issue statements of support for Israel, they feel that the deaths of tens of thousands of Palestinians are met with silence or justification. They see a double standard where one group's pain is publicly acknowledged while theirs is ignored. This has led to widespread calls for a ceasefire and for local governments to recognize Palestinian suffering. For many, especially young people, their Palestinian identity has become something they must constantly defend and explain, a constant fight to simply be seen as human. The feeling of being unheard has been made worse by a rise in anti-Muslim incidents. Since October 7th, reports of Islamophobia have hit record highs. People have been targeted for wearing a hijab or for speaking out in support of Palestinians. This has created an atmosphere of fear, where many feel they have to be careful about what they say or do. They feel that their empathy for Palestinians is being mistaken for support of terrorism, a painful and unfair accusation. This climate of suspicion makes it difficult to have open conversations and adds to the sense of isolation that many Muslims are experiencing. Yet, in the face of this frustration and pain, there is a powerful commitment to peace and dialogue. Muslim leaders and community members are actively working to build and maintain relationships with their Jewish neighbors. They are quick to condemn violence against all innocent civilians on both sides. They understand that the political conflict is being used to divide them, and they are resisting that narrative. In interfaith meetings and community events, they are sharing their stories, listening to the pain of others, and searching for a path to mutual understanding. They are driven by the core Islamic values of justice, mercy, and the sanctity of all human life. It is honestly incredibly tempting to look at the conflict between Jewish and Muslim communities and see it as a holy war, a continuation of ancient religious hatred. But that's like looking at a tree and only seeing the leaves while completely ignoring the roots and the trunk. The truth is, the division we see today is overwhelmingly fueled by modern politics, not ancient scripture. The core texts of Judaism and Islam do not command their followers to hate one another. In fact, they share more common ground than most people realize. The animosity is a product of the last century, not the last millennium. It is a story of land, nationalism, and power struggles. Think about it this way. For centuries, Jews and Muslims lived together in relative peace across the Middle East and North Africa. There was no widespread, continuous war between the two religions. The conflict ignited with the rise of modern political movements, specifically Zionism and Palestinian nationalism. Both groups laid claim to the same small piece of land, and this territorial dispute became the epicenter of the conflict. Because one group was predominantly Jewish and the other predominantly Muslim, the political battle for land was easily painted with a religious brush. This made the conflict more emotional and, much harder to solve, as it became about identity and divine right instead of just politics. National and international politics pour fuel on this fire every single day. Media narratives, especially on social media, often show the most extreme voices from each side, making it seem like everyone is locked in a state of permanent rage. Politicians use the conflict to rally their supporters, often using divisive language that portrays the other side as an existential threat. This constant drumbeat of us versus them makes it very difficult for ordinary people to see the humanity in one another. The political machinery benefits from the division, while the communities themselves pay the price in fear, suspicion, and broken relationships. This is why, in places where local connections are strong, the political divisions often fade away. In neighborhoods where Jews and Muslims have been friends, neighbors, and business partners for years, the international conflict doesn't always break those bonds. For example, in places like Frankfurt's Bahnhofsviertel, people see each other as family and reject the divisive politics imported from abroad. They know that their neighbor is not their enemy. This shows that when people are allowed to build their own relationships, free from the pressure of macro-level politics, they often choose connection over conflict. The problem is not religion, it's the political forces that exploit it. When we talk about the conflict between Jewish and Muslim communities, the question of who is more powerful always comes up. But power is not a simple thing. It's not like a video game where one side has a higher score. The balance of power is complicated and changes depending on where you are and what kind of power you're talking about. It's an asymmetrical relationship, meaning it is rarely, if ever, equal. In one context, one group might hold all the cards, while in another context, the situation could be completely different. Understanding this is key to seeing the full picture of the conflict. In the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict itself, there is a clear imbalance in military and political power. Israel has one of the most powerful and technologically advanced militaries in the world, backed by strong international allies like the United States. The Palestinian people, on the other hand, do not have a state, a national army, or the same level of global political influence. This military and political dominance means that Israel controls the borders, the resources, and the daily lives of Palestinians in the occupied territories. This creates a situation where one side has overwhelming power and the other side is living under its control. However, if you shift the context to social and political life in Western countries, the power dynamics can look different, though still complex. In the United States, for example, the Jewish community is often seen as having more institutional support. Pro-Israel advocacy groups are well organized and influential, and public officials are more likely to issue statements of support for Israel. Muslim and Arab communities, in contrast, often feel their voices are marginalized in the political sphere. They have to fight much harder to have their perspectives heard and to get official acknowledgement of Palestinian suffering. This can create a power imbalance in the public square. But power is not just about armies and governments. There is also power in numbers and in narrative. Globally, there are nearly 2 billion Muslims and only about 15 million Jews. In international forums like the United Nations, Muslim-majority countries form a significant voting bloc. Furthermore, in the age of social media, the power of narrative has become incredibly important. The story of Palestinian suffering and the images of devastation in Gaza have gained huge traction online, shaping global public opinion, especially among younger generations. This has created a form of soft power that can challenge the traditional power structures and bring international pressure to bear. Power is fluid, and it is contested in many different arenas. Even when the news is filled with stories of conflict, something remarkable is happening on the ground. Away from the politicians and the headlines, many Jews and Muslims are actively refusing to be enemies. They are choosing to build bridges of understanding instead of walls of division. These efforts are not always easy, and they are often quiet, but they are happening in communities all over the world. These are the stories of people who insist on seeing the humanity in each other, even when it's hard. They are a powerful reminder that peace is not just a dream, it's a choice that people make every single day. One inspiring example comes from Syracuse University in New York. In 2024, the university launched a Jewish-Muslim fellowship. This program was not just about having a single polite conversation. It was designed to create a structured space where Jewish and Muslim students and chaplains could meet regularly, share their experiences, and build real relationships. They received a grant from an organization called Interfaith America, which believes that dialogue is a powerful tool for peace. By creating a space for honest and respectful conversation, the university is empowering the next generation to resist polarization and to find strength in their shared values rather than their differences. This spirit of connection can also be found in places that have been hit hard by the recent tensions. In Tarrant County, Texas, the period after October 7th was filled with grief and anger for both communities. Formal interfaith dialogue was even paused because the emotions were so raw. But that didn't stop the leaders from reaching out to each other. Religious leaders from both faiths publicly expressed their shared sorrow for the loss of all innocent lives. They made it clear that their hope was to resume their formal conversations in 2025, showing a deep commitment to not letting the conflict permanently break the bonds they had worked so hard to build. In Frankfurt, Germany, a city with a long history of Jewish and Muslim coexistence, the community's response to the conflict was to double down on unity. Local Jewish and Muslim leaders immediately came together to condemn all forms of hate, whether anti-Semitic or anti-Muslim. They drew on decades of friendship and shared local identity to resist being pulled apart by international politics. People in these communities see each other not as representatives of a political conflict, but as neighbors, friends, and family. These real-life examples show that dialogue, empathy, and personal relationships are the most powerful tools we have to overcome division. The loudest voices we hear are often the most extreme ones. They are the ones that make the news and fill up our social media feeds. But the majority of people are not shouting. The majority of ordinary Jews and Muslims are not driven by hate. They are people who want to live their lives in peace, raise their families, and get along with their neighbors. They are the quiet voices that often get lost in the noise, but they represent a powerful, silent majority that wants unity, not division. These are the people who are tired of the conflict and who believe that a better future is possible, These everyday people show their desire for peace in small but meaningful ways. It might be a Jewish business owner in New York who keeps his friendship with the Muslim shopkeeper across the street, even when their communities are in pain. It might be a Muslim doctor in London who treats all her patients with the same care and compassion, regardless of their faith. It might be a group of Jewish and Muslim mothers who start a playgroup for their children, wanting them to grow up seeing each other as friends, not as enemies. These are not grand political gestures, but they are the building blocks of a peaceful society. Many of these people feel trapped by the conflict. They don't feel represented by the hardline politicians or the violent extremists who claim to speak for them. They feel a deep sense of connection to their own community and their heritage, but they also feel a deep sadness about the suffering of the other side. They are capable of holding two truths at once, that their people are hurting and that the other people are hurting too. This empathy is a form of resistance against the simple black and white narratives that fuel the conflict. It's a quiet rebellion of the heart. This shared desire for peace is the most powerful resource we have. It is a wellspring of hope in a landscape that can often seem barren and dry. When you listen carefully, you can hear these voices everywhere. They are in the interfaith groups that continue to meet, in the joint charity projects that help those in need, and in the simple, everyday acts of kindness between neighbors. They are the proof that the things that unite people, the love for family, the desire for safety, and the hope for a better world, are far stronger than the political forces that try to tear them apart. The history between Jews and Muslims is complex, filled with moments of both beautiful harmony and profound pain. The path they have walked has led them to a difficult present, where political conflict has created deep wounds and a seemingly unbridgeable gap. It is easy to look at this situation and feel hopeless, to believe that the cycle of violence and mistrust is unbreakable. But to do so would be to ignore the most important part of the story, the people themselves. The future of Jewish-Muslim relations will not be decided by history alone. It will be decided by the choices that people make today. The path forward requires us to do something that feels difficult in our modern world: to listen. It means listening to the fear and grief in the Jewish community without dismissing it. It means listening to the pain and frustration in the Muslim community without ignoring it. Dialogue is not about winning a debate. It is about understanding a different perspective. It is about creating spaces where people can share their stories and their humanity without fear of judgment. This is not a quick or easy process. It requires patience, courage, and a genuine willingness to see the world through someone else's eyes. We must also consciously choose to separate people from their governments. To hold every Jewish person responsible for the actions of the Israeli government is a form of prejudice. In the same way, to hold every Muslim responsible for the actions of extremist groups like Hamas is a form of prejudice. Ordinary people are not their politicians. They are individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, and hopes. By resisting the urge to generalize, we can open the door to real connection. We can see the person in front of us, not just the label we have been taught to associate with them. Ultimately, the path to peace is paved with hope. It is the hope that is embodied in every interfaith project, every shared meal, and every quiet conversation between neighbors. It is the hope that drives people to resist the narratives of hate and to believe in a shared future. The conflict is real and the pain is deep, but the human desire for connection is also real, and it is powerful. By choosing empathy over anger, dialogue over division, and hope over history, a future of peace and mutual respect is not just possible, it is within our reach.